Buenos días a todos.
Very good morning. We are going to begin our morning session, our third session, with the panel Current Challenges the Role Culture Plays. We're going to begin by the participation of José Ramo Alcalá. He is a full professor of graphical expression procedures and image technologies at the University of Castilla-La Mancha. He's also the director of the MIDECIANT in Cuenca, and he is responsible for collection and art archives of contemporary art in Cuenca. He has written many books such as How Do You Hang a Virtual Picture, published in 2009 by CREA, a very suggestive title. He's also curator and director of, for instance, the Electronic Art Museum, or the Words that is given by the Extremadura University, and Digital Media 1.0. José Ramón Alcalá is going to be talking about the role creativity plays in current challenges, the museum as European identity. Thank
you. Buenos días.
Good morning to you all. Thank you to the Foundation of Yuste for giving me the opportunity to participate in this special forum. Thank you to a person that I admire and I consider my friend, Pilar Mogollón. He's a treasure for the University of Extremadura. Thank you, Pilar, because you give me a chance to speak around topics that perhaps in fora related to museography and history of art are usually neglected. I would like to make this reflection addressed to the younger historians, curators, museographers, historians of art, cultural managers, because I'm going to tell you about the challenge that is there and that hasn't been put into place so far. What I want to do is to reflect what is Europe today. It is very nice to speak about our history. It is very nice to say that Europe has been the center of the world and the center of thought. But what is Europe today? Cultural identity has to be thought from the present. Of course, the past, as we have seen these days, is what allows us where we come from and who we are. But Europe has great challenges, and what I want to do today is that I should say that the history should be repeated, and the role of the artist and the role of the museum of the historian are essential, because it has always been like this. It's not enough with ideas or experiences. You have to shape them. Art works with the what is sensitive. Symbolic is what is kept in our mind and in our eyes, and this is what generates our idea that of what we feel in front of that stimulus or that reflection. This is what I want to do. Why do I want to do this? Because I want to present you my own model. I am an artist of a young generation that decided that the paradigms were changing, that art was in a cul-de-sac, and that the only way was to start from scratch, use or really take by attack the new media. And I was given the opportunity in the University of Cuenca to create a new lab, which eventually evolved into a museum. That was in 1989, with all the crises and the problems of keeping the production. In 2012, I thought, looking back with certain melancholy, really we have done a lot of things. We have really produced a lot. if we really compiled all this and we were able to narrate it and disseminate it correctly, we would probably be constituting a heritage, an artistic heritage that would speak of who we were at that time, what we had, how we had approached the changing of society. That is how I created the contemporary art collections in Cuenca. What they are saying, these collections, is that today the process between producing make it heritage and narrative is all compressed in one thing. You don't need 200 years now. We have the technologies to support us. We have the contemporary tempo, which has been revolutioned. The tempo of internet, the time of internet is even faster than light speed. So we can take distance from the very immediate. This is the point of departure of my reflection. Perhaps the reflection I'm going to read is quite hard. As the interpreters were telling me, it is not the same to write as being followed orally. I know that the young people are going to follow me, because I want to do is to think in depth fully, that lead us to think. These we should have thought about, because otherwise we're not going to turn to action. This is the point of departure, so that you can understand what I'm going to do. The first I'm going to do is to reflect on what is Europe today for an intellectual and for an artist. Marek Więcik, in a keynote lecture in the Collège de France on the end of Utopia and the return to melancholy, Wolf Lepenies speak of a new historical moment where it could prevail again, a trend to melancholy in European thought. I don't know if I can show the PowerPoint. Thank you. It is true that the last utopias have been disintegrated. The fall of the Berlin Wall ended the socialist utopia of the end, and the end of the capitalist utopia of the media, of the means, based on the idea that the development of knowledge and technique were the best way to thrive in Europe and civil society. Homo Europeus now, in a moment of disillusionment, cannot seek refuge in melancholy in a hurry. Melancholy that has been around for a while. Albert Dürer thought about it. Le Pen's concluded with quoting Paul Valéry, the most pessimistic judgment on man, things and life fits marvelously with the action and the optimism this requires. This is European. At the same time, and 1 kilometer away, Baudrillard spoke on the contrary on utopia that has been made reality in the last decade from the phenomena of the orgy of liberation and the technical immortality. We live, said Baudrillard, in a post-orgiastic world where we have opened all the possibilities that have gone throughout all the roads, have squeezed all the means of production, even the virtual production. In this madness of the self-realization, exaltation and glorification and of our practical value, we are fed up and there's no place for loss or melancholy. Technically, rescuers in this new turn to civilization, alterity, difference and yearning. Melancholy, the mechanism of memory that multiplies images of lack or loss of things, which changes quicker than the heart of man. Paris changes, but nothing moves in my sadness, said the flaneur. But there's no time to respond to the dazzling tempo of the internal time of events. It reacts in a melancholy which is based on the dispersion produced by the adamant count of losses, adrift with altered and bloated senses, and at the same time, paradoxically, is an stagnation versus the ultrasonic speed of the modern and threatening city. Utopia can only appear in hot-blooded temperaments, in those that absorb melancholy and are open to think on objectives to fulfill in an idea of future, advancement and change. If we believe Marinetti, that sanguine temperament is the one that defines better any work of futuristic utopia. The author of the Futuristic Manifesto emphasized the will of power characteristic of a sanguine temperament and the Superman, and he defined futurists as a person who is serene, that initiates actions with a view put in the future, without qualms, without being pedantic, without false sense of shame, without mysticism or melancholy. These are words of Marinetti. Utopia and melancholy, two figures of the same blood, discover their aesthetic closeness in their trend to collection. Collecting that encompasses everything. For utopia is the inventory of that possesses forever and that incorporates to preserve it in a harmonious construction organized forever. However, for the second, it is a collection of immeasurable things among themselves, because it cannot know the salvation of an only sense, the hospitality of a single space. However, they are not isolated things, because as fragments without unity cannot be differentiated by any characteristic or feature. This is the summary of what for me represents the internal fight of the contemporary European, that fight between melancholy and utopia. And there is where we should all start. The following reflection is defined on the function of the artist, not of the artist as such, but the three-tier thing: artist, historian, and the one that makes it operative in a museum. I'm convinced that these places and this historical moment are appropriate to remind ourselves of the importance of art and creativity to face, as Europeans and from Europe, this historical moment so special, where we are debating between the need of utopias and the pathological trend to melancholy. The artistic practice, innovation, creativity will be determining actions for the building and shaping of cultural identity that needs urgent renovation, where recognizing ourselves again as the great works and the avant-garde movements of the history of art demonstrate. Let us think, what is the utopia project in works like the Bosque, El Greco, where it is necessary the techno-expressive ability and the sensitivity of someone like Domenico Theotokopoulos to express deity, mysticism, to express how figures are transformed in souls that reach deity. This concept have to have a shape, and that is language, aesthetics, the formal feature that geniuses like El Greco managed to get. And if they are not well told within a micro-narrative, they don't have any influence. When do we discover El Greco? Several centuries later. It is true that we are in agreement that forming, looking after, supporting and recognizing models and idols to imitate our artists, our sensitive and intellectually well-prepared creators, is a vital task for our sick society, and to try to overcome the current deplorable country and our loved and hated Europe, and in general all the developed societies in the Western world. Commissions which are important for society to make to our artists, to build worldviews where we can recognize our needs, our ambitions, images that will be like post-its, where it will be in bold type the main and urgent tasks. Narratives well told, which have credit and which allow us to know who we are, where we come from, and to move towards a good destination, trying not to repeat old and recurrent fatal errors. It may be that the materialization of all these commissions entrusted to our artists may initially fill us with confusion, perplexity, because we are not able to understand that what we have been given, since we cannot be spectators of their sophisticated creations, maybe we may have faith that one day this will be the memory of what we were when we were coeval of these people. We have to keep the faith, trusting that their artistic creations will be an irreplaceable legacy where our heirs, our children, our great-grandchildren will recognize themselves. The program of the French Revolution or the Enlightenment has to be fixed in memory. This is the nicest examples that I have found from modernity, from the French Revolution and Enlightenment. The anecdote is very well known. It's one more of the vessels that refers to the year 1819. This is a shipwreck where a series of persons go adrift in those northern seas between Great Britain and France, in Normandy, and in the end they manage to touch land, but then the drama they see in their contemporaries is extraordinary. They have had to eat each other in order to survive. This is a drama in a society that is preparing particular ethics, and it speaks about liberté, égalité, fraternité. What do the enlightened people do? They announce a commission where a 7 by 3 meters scene artist should reflect on the relevant reflection. Géricault wins that announcement, and when he paints this, the work is exposed at the entrance of the Louvre, and thousands of people goes and parade to see it in order to think about the ethic and moral consequences that are debated in parliaments, in academies, etc. That is the particular role that is fixed in memory art through our principles, and that perhaps today we should rememorate, and perhaps today the artists should be in the ports of Italy, Greece, or Northern Africa, seeing the tragedy and the drama, speculating so that we could think of that. This is a process that has been followed, and as you can see, artists, fantastic artists like Goya or Picasso, when he painted the Guernica, or Jackson Pollock, that represent the end of a society and the beginning of utopia, the materialistic utopia of the capitalist society, the beginning of an era of postmodernity, with Andy Warhol on the pop art, the decadence with the magnificent portraits of Lucian Freud, the way in which feminism represents itself, in order to reproduce something that is not eroticism or pornography, but rather a reflection on what is a woman beyond its simple body as a desire object. And then technologies help to change language because the grammar leads us to a different place, the place that is no longer the naturalist image where photography technifies it and brings us to pornography, for instance. These are some of the examples that are some of the most fascinating. Or the Japanese, they make transgression. They are devastated by the Western culture, and artists through Photoshop technology enter in the Cézanne apples, and they introduce Japanese mythology, Oriental mythology. This is a way to tell us through magnificent metaphors how the 21st century Japanese feels. This is a marvelous image. It's the port of Calais, the one of the Jericho raft. What is here is a number of immigrants that have died and they are represented through the X-ray in the Calais port. The lorries that take that have X-ray panels, where these X-ray are the new paintings of the Jericho raft, where we can see ourselves, although technology has changed language. This is the difference. It's the same. It is the port of Calais. They are immigrants, people who arrive in a deplorable state where an ethical and moral commotion is provoked. And women can cry now in front of an image that 50 years ago didn't represent anything, but now we can read in the blues, cancer. This is the evolution of iconography and iconographic culture, how artists have to use the new media in order to reach that level, or how there is a moral provocation. Edward Kac goes to the Geneva biogenetics laboratory and asks them to inoculate a phosphorescent gene in a small rabbit, and it is phosphorescent because it has been genetically modified. These ideas of artists, like for instance, make dolls with cells that are growing, and they end up like the Japanese with a small feet, or the Africans with long necks, because from the childhood they have been modeled. This is the moral reflection nowadays. This is what modern artists know how to do. What biogenetics will will reach here, then we are there, and there is a debate. It's no good or it's not good or bad. It's simply to provoke debate. This is the way to tell how present space is. I was in the Council of Europe where Stephen Hawking was, and he said, this is the young man who makes theories, because he's the one that is capable to develop representations n-dimensional of my theories. Without his ability, with this young boy, and his ability to represent n-dimensional spaces, I wouldn't be able to transmit what I want. This is a mix of art, science and technology. Or this is spectacular. Look at this. You know what it is? The new Ptolemy map of the world. This is the Ptolemy's cartography, and this is the cartography of the network in real time. This is made by an association of hackers, net artists, who help the Chiapas revolutionaries in order to disseminate their ideas. And you know how they did it? Chiapas had their proclamations, revolutionary proclamations on a donkey, and in Oaxaca there were hackers that knew how to cartography the network in real time in order to place servers where less flow of information was going, because those were the one that the Interpol would take longer to discover. And that is the way how in 1 week or 2 weeks the revolutionary message was in the net. And this is what takes us to say that information, when it is controlled, is power. There is a parallel world that has to be cartographed again. As artists, the artists were the main elements in the cartography. If the captain was there and died, then the vessel could continue. Anyone was replaceable except the cartographer. When the cartographer was sick or left, they stopped in the next port, and they needed a drawer, someone, a cartographer who could continue dressing the map, because then they would get lost and they wouldn't be able to name things. And only when you name your virgin, your queen, your king, your brother, or your wife, then at that moment when you name it, this is yours. And that biased circle of power is the way in which we have to see how this is. And we have to be intellectuals, and we have to know the mechanisms. These are some of the ideas. I'm not going to go further into it, but I would have liked to show you all these experiences. Second point, it is not enough with doing this, we generate these revolutions. We have to tell them. We have to generate a narrative, as I am telling you this. The importance of these things, that for you is probably the first time you see these images, and you have to put them into context and to narrate them. So what I have discovered through 30 years of forming a collection in my museum in Cuenca, there's no collection without narrative. The museum is the art institution that manages. Manuel Borja Villel last year said, and it is published in an interview with Marcelo Espósito, that historiographic narratives, although based on realities, they operate as fictions. Narratives as historians, with the mediation of the institution, are statements that have effects on the present reality. They modify the collective perception of the past. And an artwork is an artifact, and a museum is a type of institution that serves to project a narrative, allowing to perceive a continuity with history or changing its direction. But one should think that the narrative is linked to the structure of the institution where you operate. There's no way but approaching how to modify the institution if you want to change substantially something in the long term. A museum has to be managed being aware of the context it occupies. It can never be only a reflection of reality. It intervenes on it. And from a political point of view, it is fascinating to think how the museographic work can help to transform from the bottom the common sense on history. The present is defined by a series of keys that have to be thought in historical depth, both in their continuities and in their breaking points. The disappearance of the author, the centrality of the spectator, the theatrical dimension of art, the economic and cultural globalization, for instance. The aesthetic forms, intellectual statements, political events do not live in one single time, in the moment where they are born. They have several lives. They survive echoing different eras. With art globalization, the disappearance of the limits of artistic disciplines, the pressure of cultural industries, the need of new institutional forms have more strength versus the hegemony of markets and entertainment, the big enemies. However, this attempt to reformulate the function of museum and its strategies is something that nobody questions. It's simply one of the possible approaches, a very committed one and very sophisticated, and which is having a great effect and giving very important results. For example, in the Queen Sofia Art Center, through Borja Villel, as he did before in the Tapies Foundation, and the constitution of Barcelona and its identity, cultural identity. But there are other approaches which are in parallel, taking a different course. The one that interests most in this context is that understands and assumes the IT's society, information and communication technologies, ICTs, where most of the artistic practices are carried out contemporary, is not simply to update methodologies, but questioning their format. The approach of Borja Villel, quite successfully applied in Tapies or in the Queen Sofia museums, leaves aside the immense challenge that we have now with designing, developing and managing a museum of intangible works, a new system of dissemination and distribution of contemporary productions, those of intangible digital nature and those that are intended to be circulated in online networks. So in the Queen Sofia Museum and in other museums, or in the majority of them, the productions in media art, on new media art, although they are hegemonic and predominant in the second half of the 20th century, are not present in these museums. This is maybe a paradox. José Luis Brea, my colleague and an important philosopher who passed away from cancer very early, he worked with me in Cuenca. In 2008, reflected on how the new technologies and its globalizing effect on art, culture, and contemporary societies could modify substantially these functions and strategies that so convincingly and pride said Manuel Borja Villel in his interview with Expósito. Brea reflected that the museum cannot be alien to all the transformations that it suffers. Modifications that from the technological conditions, linguistic, communicative, and even the organization of their forms and management are being affected by or are affecting the forms of representation, of building truth and memory, desire, its pregnancies, projections, expectations that human nature plays in the spectrum of symbolic practices and cultural practices regarding the self-understanding of its own existence as an individual, but also of its belonging and inclusion in the communities with which he identifies himself and where he recognizes himself. We should start by recalling that the museum was and probably is still today a crucial device because it organizes the worldviews of the self-representations and reciprocal recognition. We can perhaps say that it was probably the first that in a very conscious way was oriented towards that purpose, to organize worldviews, collective worldviews, under what the Enlightenment, and Kant in particular, could be described as a cosmopolitan point of view, which did not lack a certain vocation of being perpetuated, related to a prolonged existence without a duration limit. It was, of course, important to try and produce a device that could be a mirror of the human condition that was itself thought as universal and at the same time as eternal, as referred to the wholeness of history of the human as a homogeneous and continuous time. That is indeed the model that defines the enlightened idea of history and humanity as a horizon of a regulating civilizational project linked to the universal dissemination of culture, weapons, and the powers of reflection and thought that we have made public. That museum is son of the same program. I would even say that it is one of the most important production devices, one of the most significant agencies. We could perhaps put it together with the encyclopedia, parliamentarianism, university, but perhaps none of all these that I have quoted would have so clearly entrusted the idea of giving men a twinned identity. Perhaps no one would be so important to produce and re-establish the self-reflective conscious of a common worldview, shared universally and capable to transcend frontiers, civilizations, eras and centuries. The Enlightenment Museum would like to be that house of man where they intended to collect the worldview shared by all humans as homogeneous and the most unanimous and highest expression of the human condition as a universal and eternal program of life. What has been broken now, because the new technologies question all the system, is what we have inherited. That's why I wanted, I was eager to see Francofonia of Alexander Sokurov, a film that I saw a few weeks ago, and that I found it fascinating. In fact, the vision of this film is what has pushed me to write this talk. The building of the Louvre, the film is very interesting. It has three plans. First, the building of the Louvre. In the building of the Louvre, there's someone who's very essential. What is the Louvre? The human search for form. The human search for form is Napoleon's project, the enlightened project of that marvelous first Napoleon. Later on, he changed, of course, but he was the son of the French Revolution, of the Enlightenment, and he intends to disseminate it. Liberté, fraternité, égalité is a great project, and that idea gives the great force to prevail over the world, and once again to make it military hegemonically dominated. What Napoleon says is that when he goes through different nations with different civilizations, all of them have to be in dialogue with the core contemporary thought, that is that of the Enlightenment. So classic and romantic works are produced to the greatest glory of the enlightened spirit, and the French revolutions are the center, and throughout which the museum is organized, saying we are the heirs of Egypt, Greece, Africa, etc. This is the first approach. That is the building of the Louvre. It's an intellectual building of a great importance. But it so happens that years later, decades later, Nazis invade Paris. The Nazis, and their invasion is shown in the film when Hitler enters Paris, and the first thing he does is to appoint a marshal expert in the history of art in order to try to preserve the works of the Louvre and the French museums. With which intention, we don't know. Perhaps the idea was to do perhaps the same as Napoleon, take the Louvre arts of work and take them to Berlin and say the core ideology of the Nazis is the heir of the Louvre, etc. Perhaps he intended to repeat the model. In any way, it is very interesting because the film shows real episodes that are mixed with fiction, where you can see how the French, who are seeing it coming, their main worry is not to save their life, but to save the artworks of the Louvre. They dismount them, they take them packed in the lorries, so that in the end, when the marshal arrives, there are very few or only the less important works. And this is the image. The jellyfish rafter Jericho was there a few meters or kilometers away from where it was, the Louvre. The third dialogue of the film is the film of a vessel full of containers that is about to sink. There is a dialogue through the radio between the owner and the captain. Throw everything away, throw all the containers, because if the ship sinks, you're going to die, all of you. I can't, the captain says. What do you mean you can't? I can't. There are 100 of containers where I have, among the 1,000 containers, where I have the masterpieces of this or the other museum. I can't remember which one. So I prefer to sink with those works of art than save myself and pass to history as the one that allowed the sinking of these masterpieces. So these are three dialogues where it is explained the importance, the symbolic importance of art, the building of identity, in this case European identity, the meaning of the museum, and thirdly, what is our responsibility towards the preservation, the making of heritage, and the generation of a narrative. This is what I wanted to explain to you. So since I have 55 seconds left, I have told you the main things. What I wanted to say is that at this point we have a new model. The new model of contemporary museum is the one that I am developing in my museum in Cuenca, because it is a practical experience which gives way to what CAC represents. When a group of young people in their 20s are made professors of the Faculty of Fine Arts in Cuenca, we decide to install new disciplines: video art, performance, sound art, artistic and electronic art. So we start with workshops of experiment to make experiments. Many people from Spain and other parts of the world come. And what we achieve is to produce a lot in experimental territory, in those things where you couldn't do in the official area of art because they were too experimental, too bold. 30 years later, we discovered that we have generated, among all of us, with a series of models, the performing arts archive, sound art, electroacoustic sound in Cuenca, parquet review only in New York and Cuenca because it was donated by Elga de Alberto, our project, the Museum of Siam, the collection of all information on the production of Pedro Almodóvar, which was donated because we made him honoris causa, and so we are the ones to manage the copyright of what he produces in his company El Deseo S.A. All these collections form a sort of museum without walls that have generated a spectacular heritage whose contents do not appear in any of the contemporary museums in the world, and that, however, are talking much more of what is being our society than the Warhol serigraphy hung on the wall, which is a perversion of the pop art enumerated by Richard Hamilton in 1958. So how we identify ourselves as the refugees, those that place their hats, and we are the impressionists. We are maybe bad painters, but we are the present, and we are looking to the future. This idea that all of a sudden these marvelous paintings of the Pompier were occupying the best places have been replaced by this small picture of the Jeu de Paume. This way to look from the past to the present is what we intend with Cuenca and the CAC. And if Cuenca can be something, and here we're speaking of cultural tourism, heritage and roots, etc., Cuenca can boast of having a golden mile of contemporary art, where we have discovered that the spirit that gives way to modern art, which is the abstract art museum, where we create a one artist space, managed by artists, has a continuity in time with what has happened in the Fine Arts Faculty and its collections. What we have to do is to build our narrative, that is, tell how there, in that place, this in particular happened, and what has happened may pertain to the symbolic idea that we thought at that time, although we were the refugees, that was happening in those days. The idea of the museum without walls is this organigram. In this organigram, what we have is the heritage and the lab that produces all the time artists from all the world, sound, whatever. It is connected with the university, with a place where everybody, where thought is generated, with research, with teaching. The difference between heritage and archive. Works and virtual archives are the same thing. It's the same concept. What is what counts? The ability I have and the right I have to generate a narrative and to disseminate it. It is not so important to have physically the work, but the right to tell about it and to disseminate it. This is the experience of CAC that I am trying to put into function in a way to rethink the function of the museum in the 21st century, which adapts to the practices of the 21st century. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, José Ramón, por presentar.
Thank you very much, José Ramón, for presenting us. Thank you, José Ramón, for presenting us this general setting of the present of modern art. This has been very suggestive topic, and he knows a lot about this topic, and he's very passionate about what he's living and his work and his professional work. If you have any question, not many, so we don't run a bit late, but if you have any questions, please raise your hand. I think that yesterday I introduced myself. I am a researcher in media, but I am a historian. I think that I'm going to ask two questions. First of all, is there any call for proposals for new methodologies for studying history of media, digital media, because part of my research has to do with this, the new ways of communicating. And my second question, have you researched Barico, excuse me, and how are you connecting this wall-less museum, that romantic vision that he talks about the mutation and the invasion of mutants? Because I did not quite understand what you think about what is the construction of narrative in this era, and what is the role to play by historians in this change and this shift of paradigm. Thank you for your comment and your remark. You should know that in the past few years there is an international movement that held some different congresses, and it's called Media Art Histories. It consists on the illusion and the responsibility of those who control works of art, of media art, of contemporary art, to tell and narrate about these works. And we have to do that together. It requires a debate. Relief is a book that they just publish on it, and that book, Relief, there are about 15 micro-stories where they tell how the computer started to be used in the 70s, or what was the first computer exhibition in the Biennale, and what was the reaction of critics and society. And today we could start telling the story of that specific manifestation. Media histories is based on a new discipline that is being echoed in some universities, like the Krems University or the Cuenca University with me, or the Paris 8 University with Mr. Reyes. And we talk about media archaeology, which is the conceptual tool and the historiographical tool that is the basis so that we can tell the story of these media art histories. If you're interested, you should go online. We are very active, and you could see who the main authors where you can go to learn about this, because, for instance, Oliver Brown has the ADA, which is an archive, a general archive, and I sent one of my researchers there so that she collects the whole media art in Spain. So as a scholar of the ADA, which I am, I have the ability of giving information. And since it is validated by me, this information is going to be taken account. There was nothing about this type of media in Spain. We were the first to do it, and we started the beginning in 1969 with the first IBM computer, and we have researched the works of Barbadillo, Iturralde, which were the first artists who started doing media art. And that archive of digital art includes this type of works. So if you're really interested on this, we can do a one-on-one, and maybe I can give you my email, and I can provide you with the information so that you can research a bit further. Thank you very much, José Ramón, for your brilliant and passionate exhibition and presentation. We're not indifferent to this. I think you have very beautifully and interesting described the museum as a space to create and represent this collective and social imaginarium, a self-representation space that helps us understand each other, understand our society. You also described the dilemma between the European intellectual in two ways, like the nostalgic intellectual and the one who is very much into utopia, and that is reflected in art. I would like to ask you, as director and curator of museums, whether you have perceived in the past 10 years, and especially after the global crisis, have you seen whether artists are now trending towards creation models based more in utopia that you showed us also happening in the past? This utopia, and that's my second question, do they go to the things that we're never going to reach? You talked about Marinetti. Or are artists being based on utopia, what Greek used to call utopos, the best place? You showed us an image of immigrants. That's a terrible image. And how does that translate into the media modern format? I would like to know what's your opinion about this. Thank you very much, because now I can explain something that I believe is essential. The places where artists do their art are different. Now you don't have artist studio individually. Contemporary art centers are no longer places where there is a pilgrimage to use high technology, because anywhere else there is no access to it. In the 80s or 90s, if you wanted to use technology, you had to go to the Canon Art or to Tokyo so that you could use big computers or biotechnology or even the internet. But nowadays, this best technology can be used in my small Mac, on microchips, on a Wi-Fi broadband connection, and that has changed the picture. When the old media labs 20 years ago, they were based on technologies, and they're still being called nowadays media labs. But now it's not a technology laboratory. Now it's mediation laboratory. In Madrid, for instance, we have that cultural mediation laboratory, but the name is the same as Media Lab. And so artists are shifting towards centers focusing on technology. Now artists are transdisciplinary, and they establish dialogues with other sciences. So now producing art is possible in a wide setting, and the physical agora and the virtual agora, it is reached through other artists. And that is important because now you have to go to different places. Now you don't go to find the artists. Artists are everywhere and they all produce art. And that's a shift that is very important, and we have paid much attention to it so we do not make a mistake when researching.